I'm going to start with this chart, which is aged at this point. It was inspired in 2004 when we realized, gosh, there are these two huge generations, and they're both entering life stages that support walkable urbanism at every scale. And this chart took on a life of its own. It ended up on the front cover above the fold of the Wall Street Journal. Just to explain what it is, and you can see this is a bit of chart craft, because the scale goes from 35 million to 45 million, so that this bulge is exaggerated. When you look at it, in reality, it's flattened out. And we're looking at 10-year age cohorts. The gray, and this is, we did this in such a hurry, but then it became part of the world. Why we had 20 to 29 gray and 50 to 59 blue, I have no idea. We weren't thinking. Nevertheless, these are 10-year age cohorts and shows what I always describe as the two largest generations in history hitting a life stage simultaneously, where their lifestyle in a walkable urban neighborhood was paramount. We can go into that later. We are right here. So in the beginning, we were talking about the leading edge of the baby boom and the leading edge of the millennials, their children. Boomers now down to 73.8 million. Millennials up to 88.7 in 2010. Millennials beat out my generation as the largest in American history. But it will be a short reign. Now, when we give this presentation about what we call the demographic imperative or the Great Convergence, we always get, we're talking to an audience filled with Gen Xers. How many of you here are Gen Xers? Yeah. See, that's why you're such a small generation. 49 million. They started when births dropped below 4 million and then ended when demographers said, we need another generation. So this is a more honest chart, because what this looks at from this year, 2017, to 25 years from now, 2042, looks at the three generations we just talked about. The boomers, this time in a proper color to match my hair, tailing off into oblivion. The Gen Xers, the preternaturally truncated generation, starting to tail off, and the millennials just hanging in there. Now, these are forecasts that were done by Bureau of Census in 2014. It's a midline population forecast. This is population, not households, and they are forecasts that include their best guess in 2014 about the impact of immigration on generations here. As most of you are aware, all bets are off on that particular issue. The distinction between generations can be really muddied, and the distinction between a leading edge millennial and a trailing edge millennial, there are significant differences. The difference between a leading edge boomer and trailing edge boomer are quite significant as well. This slide attempts to encapsulate the impact of the Great Convergence, the demographic imperative on the built environment. Existing places, this is Dumbo in New York City. When people give you statistics, look very carefully at them, because this is the neighborhood in the 5 boroughs that has the highest median housing value. And if you ever walk on the street of Dumbo and the L train goes over the Manhattan Bridge, you wonder, is there such a thing as quadruple glazing? Because it is noisy. Now, the reason Dumbo has the highest median housing value of any neighborhood in New York City is because 30 years ago, there was no housing here. So all of it is new. So naturally, the median is going to be substantially higher than Manhattan, the best neighborhoods in Manhattan, and so on, because even the best neighborhoods have existing rentals. Just up the hill is Brooklyn Heights, which is actually a better neighborhood, but has legacy rentals and a range of housing types. This one is a new place. And apparently all the owners there drive Lotuses, which I think is quite extraordinary. This is a small town. This is where ZBA is headquartered. When you send us a postcard, that's where it lands. An existing town that's revitalized, has a main street, a walkable main street. And this is a new version. This is Serenbe, which is a new version of an agrarian-based small town. So the question is, who's next? We have these three big generations that have had all this impact. Gen X, as much as I like to deride them, were really much, much better than my generation in sticking in the cities. Generation X has raised children in cities across the country and really paved the way for the Millennials. Gen Z, 82.5 million, which technically means that my generation, which is, of course, the most disappointing generation in the history of our country, but we think we're great, is now the third largest generation in American history. But these guys are still very young. Next is Alpha Gen. And for Alpha Gen, this photo is aspirational. The oldest Alpha Gen is 4 months old and aspires to be able to sit up. The Millennials, though, will continue to dominate the conversation. Our focus, of course, is placemaking, housing. We believe very firmly that any great neighborhood has to rest on the foundation of middle-class households. Everything else is based on that. When we segment uses, we know what happens. The monoculture doesn't work in a natural world, and it doesn't work in the economic world. So here's the Millennials plus the next two generations. The Millennials, again, are green, and we chose that because they are genuinely a ecologically conscious group. Higher propensity of Millennials will buy carbon offsets when they buy an airplane ticket than, God knows, boomers will. The next, the Gen Z. Now, this is obviously is a parallel to the other chart that looks very similar. It's population, and the earlier one had population all over age 20 because they were all over age 20. This one, I have taken each of these groups and taken away a population under age 19. So this shows the impact, the economic impact as households, because our stock and trade is housing, and households are the key element. So even though even though the Alpha Gen, the first one is 4 months old, they don't really show up until 2037. Well, no, they should, actually. It's too small to show here, but these are all households. What's missing here in Alpha Gen and what's missing here in Gen Z are the population that is under the age of 20. So the impact of Gen Z is beginning to be felt now. They will, because they actually, this year they become this year they become all at age 20 and over, and they surpass the Millennials in 2035, and they'll feel the way we did in in 2010. Challenges. This is the meat, and I told you I'd show you some pictures and some charts. I've done that. Now you're expecting answers, and all I'm going to give you are questions. Because the one thing about the future is that it's unknown. Even as our former Secretary of Defense once said, there are known knowns and there are unknown knowns and there are unknown unknowns. There are a lot of unknown unknowns looking at us because of the influence of tech, which the next panel will dive into. The boomers, health and mobility will be the issue for them. There are economic issues that have to do with their moving from their family house. This is a group that a broad center, particularly the trailing edge, are sitting on houses that they think are more valuable than they really are. And that's the discussion for another whole topic. I could stand here, by the way, for an entire day and talk about these 12 or 15 slides, because each of them has depth of issues that underlie them. Right now, boomers have houses they can't sell, which actually means they can't sell them at the price they think they should. They've got stuff that they think their children should take. Their children don't want the stuff. Their children aren't even buying stuff. Their children would rather have experience. The economy, 70% of the economy is consumer spending. 20% of that is government spending on behalf of consumers, healthcare, and so on. So 50% is still people buying stuff. And people aren't buying stuff. There's too much stuff. We got too many single-family houses in the wrong places at the end of cul-de-sacs. You ask a man on the street, what's the demographic problem facing the nation? They'll say, aging Americans. And you know, we do a pretty good job of taking care of aging Americans, particularly as we get into the care-oriented thing. There is a cost issue that's really quite extraordinary, and no one's been able to deal with that, least of all the Congress. But we have models that work in urban locations, in-town neighborhoods, which are those walkable neighborhoods that still have a good percentage of single-family houses. So this is something we need to be cognizant of, but not a huge problem. Generation X, they will be empty nesting. The question is where? Will they stay in their neighborhoods? And talking about generations, even when as small as Generation X, you need to differentiate between leading edge and trailing edge. The range of lifestyles can be quite extraordinary. The mindset of Generation X that lives in Iowa and aspires to getting a new case combine, trying to figure out how to finance that, leverage that, versus one who lives in San Francisco and is concerned about getting a very, very high-quality turntable for her vintage vinyl collection. These are concerns that do not intersect at all. So when I talk about a generation, I'm talking about broad tendencies as opposed to the specifics of individual characteristics. So where generation will empty nest is a question. We assume that they will follow the same percentage, or maybe even a larger percentage will follow the boomers and nest in walkable urban neighborhoods at every scale, from the village all the way up to our great cities, but we don't know. Another question. Gen Z, leaving the nest. The question here is, when? Will they be like the Millennials and just hang around in the basement forever? We don't know. Millennials. We're going to be talking about millennials for the next 20 years. I hope that's the story from those charts that I showed. But this is what we still think of as millennials. This is where the leading edge is now. They're having baby. They are, and sometimes getting married. So it's astonishing that the progression that we're used to as geezers, none of that holds. None of it holds at all. I mean, when I was 17, I wanted a driver's license, and I wanted the best car I could possibly buy. These people are trying to figure out how to get the smallest and best phone with the most apps. So the question for these folks who are beginning to have children, not at the rates that one would expect, but it's a huge generation, is where will they settle? We talk to millennials all the time, and there is a small, vocal minority who swear they will never impose on their children what they lived through as children. Where leaving the cul-de-sac was a rite of passage. Where going anywhere, they were hostage to someone with a driver's license. And oftentimes, in the worst case, that person with a driver's license was a jerk of an older brother. They are, again, a minority, but very vocal about not imposing that kind of regimented lifestyle on their children. We shall see. So this is the question: where will they land? And like anything else in the United States, this depends on economics. We forecast that there is a baby bomb about to drop. The incendiaries that are locating where the bombs are going to go off are already landing. But take this photo and the cacophony that it implies, the child with the drum and the drumstick. The carpet will not mute the noise that this times 4.5 million will produce. So the question I will leave you with is the baby bomb challenge. We're often asked, what are you going to have to deal with? What's the big problem from a housing perspective over the next 25 years? You predicted the resurgence of the cities based on the demographic imperative. What do demographics tell you now? And this is the answer. How do we provide family housing in walkable urbanism for the millennial families that they can afford? That is the next 25 years. Thank you very much.